Hello. Is that better? Okay. Well, hello. Okay, I think that's going to work. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right, well, while people are kind of milling in, just want to make sure that you're in the right place. So this is all about the business catalog. Sorry for the provocative title. I had to get you in here somehow. So anyways. Um, it's about 11:30, and I know it's a little bit before lunchtime. Hey, Dan, how's it going? Um, so I'll try to keep this brief. I personally think that governance is the most important part of the HTTP stack, and that's my because really it allows you to actually do all the other stuff that you want to do, right? And without having proper governance, it really kind of prevents that analytic platform from being used. So anyways, that's my pitch usually. So I get very excited about it. I talk really fast. If you wouldn't mind holding your questions till the end, unless it's something really burning, I'll try to address them if it's really important quickly, but if it's going to take a long time or more of an explanation, maybe we can take that to the end, right? Anyways, so let's get started. The doors are closed, and I see we've got some interested parties in here. I think I recognize a lot of faces, so this could be, as I mentioned earlier, it could be really good or really bad. So we'll see. Okay, there's our disclaimer slide. The problem. So one of the things we're trying to address is really low confidence in data, right? You're leveraging the data like for obvious reasons. I won't rehash that. But one of the things you want is you want to be confident in your data so you can actually make good use out of it, right? You want to make sure that you don't have duplicates or missing classification. And you really don't want to have a rigid governance regime, right? Really the roadside is littered with MDM, RDM tools, right? I mean, you guys have all seen them. They're like a 2 or 3 year, deployment phase, and they're really great in the beginning. But somewhere around the middle, the rigidity, the weight basically maybe slows some of that momentum down, right? And as you get towards the end, those edge cases where that structure that you're trying to use to organize your data may not be accurate, that's when you actually get into quite a bit of problems. So one of the things that we want to do, and we'll talk about it more later, is really maintain that agility. So rigidity is really not something that is sustainable long term because people just won't use it, right? They'll have workarounds, and at some point, the tool that you've worked so hard to deploy will not be current, and then it will have less value, and people will stop using it, right? So here's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we try to keep it easy. We want to have cross-component lineage. It's kind of a mouthful. There's a whole bunch of different components in Hadoop, as you guys well know. One of the things that we want to do, because of our expertise, we're uniquely suited really to capture that lineage. And that's what we want to provide in our business catalog. We want to capture that for you, right? So if you're taking streaming data coming in from a Kafka, Bolt and Storm, run your topology, landing that in a Hive streaming table, and you want to combine that with some other data that you got from a scoop job, and that's going to be your dimension table, whatever, right? You're doing all these different types of aggregations, and you're dealing with all these different components. You don't want that complexity, at least in the data set lineage aspect of it. And that's really what we're trying to deal with here. And that goes to the second point, which is single source, right? Hadoop is complex. There's a lot of stuff under the covers, under the hood. And really what we want to do is for the things that you care about, we want to consolidate that metadata into one place, right? Dynamic access control, this is really awesome, and this actually is a talk on its own. So I'll kind of maybe put a teaser out there if you don't know about it already. We have a tutorial. We have a white paper on it as well, so you can learn more about it. I encourage you to come to our other talk, which is later today at 4:10. You can look on your schedule, and we'll talk more about it then. But really, we're here to talk about the business catalog, exclamation mark, right? We want to use a common business language, and we want it to be hierarchically organized. This hierarchy allows us to have the authoritativeness that you need from a traditional system like an MDM or an RDM solution. I got to get my best side. I'm just kidding. But the idea there really is to organize the data that you already have together so that it can be more helpful. And that's really what we want to do with the catalog, right? So the what part of it, as I talked about, it's going to organize it along business terms. So this modeling capability, this agile modeling is key, right? Every business is different, right? And there's a lot of different compliance standards that you have to contend with, maybe in different countries. So if you have a rigid system, it just can't adapt. It can't keep up with the change, this pace of change, right? And so we knew from the very beginning it had to be very agile. That modeling flexibility is really, really critical, right? We want to be able to do things beyond just recording information. We want to make it actionable, right? So we have something like a PII tag, which we've used a couple of times in different contexts and different tutorials, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But basically, something like a PII tag would be used in different parts of your organization, right? You might use it for human resources. You might use it for customer data, right? So that kind of structure where you have a hierarchical structure of your operations may have something that transects it, right? That PII tag, right? So you need that capability to model your data, right? Comprehensive features for compliance, right? So one of the things that we want to do is we really parcel out the different rules and responsibilities for that activity in the business catalog, right? And we have this notion of a data steward, which we'll talk about, and an analyst. We also want to make sure that we keep good audits, right? Obviously, this is a compliance tool as well. As a discovery tool, we need to make sure that we have good records, and we also have versioning so we can track what they did over time. So versioning is it seems like a little bit of a duplicate, but actually there's some finer points that we want to put onto it. There's a notion of like nominal time, when an effective start time for an object was, and all the history and the life cycle of that object. We can kind of get to the weeds on that one later. But the key benefits are organizing your data, impact analysis, and obviously faster insight, right? It's kind of talking about that already. I already kind of mentioned most of this stuff. So when we designed the business catalog, Hadoop or Hortonworks, HTTP specifically, had many different UIs. They were of different varying qualities, perhaps some not so good. And actually talking to one of the clients that are actually sitting in the audience, we realized that we really needed something different. We needed something that was, a definite evolution or a revolutionary step ahead of what we had. And so we actually partnered with an outside group that was focused on design-centered thinking. And we also built our own design team, and we've actually built it out. So it actually turned out to be a nice kind of a synergetic time for us. And so really, we went back to the drawing board, and we really did a lot of research. We conducted over 35 interviews with targeted users, and we actually got some kind of interesting insights, right? We did lots of usability testing. We did 3 rounds. We're going to do another one. And if you're interested in doing some testing, please let me know. I'm happy to include you in that round of testing. But we found some interesting things. The principal user, the beneficiary of the business catalog in our research for the first release is really going to be the data scientist, right? Which is pretty obvious, right? They're coming up with the insights to make your data-driven company more effective, right? Making better choices. They need to have obviously confidence in their data. They need to understand what's available, and in doing so, we have to create a tool set that enables that activity. But one of the things we found out is that they spend 50 to 80% of the time just looking and getting access to that data, right? A huge waste of resources, very valuable resources, right? So we discovered that the person who's going to enable that really is the data steward. And that's actually the person who's going to use Atlas the most, which was a little bit of an interesting finding for us. So we really focused in on that. And our goal, which is in the lower left-hand corner, is really to get that discovery time down to 25%. They need to have confidence in their data. They need to make sure that they know all the data sets that are available and get access to it right away. If we do that, then we can really have quite a bit of benefit to all organizations, right? Key concepts. I don't think I need to go over this. Business taxonomy, we've been talking about that for a while. Data lineage, I think you guys know that. One thing that might be interesting is data lineage has another type of impact for analysts. And it has to do with things like acceptable use, right? You could have a group of users and a group of data sets, and they may not have access to them. But depending on the purpose of that, that action may be allowed or not allowed. That's a really tough use case. And we don't solve it magically, perfectly yet. But one of the things that we can do is we can bring to bear all the different pieces that you would need to make that decision and put them in one place, right? We can marshal all of those bits and put them in one place, so it's at least easier to make that decision. We can even put a link to that exact policy in that definition, right? Lastly, tags versus labels versus business taxonomy. Really, this just means that it's authoritative. You can't have a duplicate, right? And you can see the benefits for yourself. Okay, so what you came here for is probably to see the business catalog, so that's what I'm going to go through. So here are the rough steps. I'm going to show you the setup in Atlas via Ranger, because we have Active Directory integration, right? So most enterprises have Active Directory. We can take that user base and that mapping to those groups and use that for permissioning, right? We're going to create and browse a taxonomy of business terms. We can create and browse tags, search for assets, basically interact with the business catalog. So let me make sure my VPN is still up. Okay, all right. Okay, so let me log out of here. Oh, that's going to be very difficult to read. Is that better? Okay. So I'm going to log in as steward. Oh, actually, I said I was going to start off with the Rangers. Let me do that. Log out of Ranger. So this is the Ranger that you know and love. We have some neat additions, though. So we have, in the Resource Manager, we have a thing called Atlas as a new resource. And we've got all these really cool operations. And in the interest of time, I won't go through them all. But they're pretty fine-grained. And you can obviously select a group and give them certain permissions, not other groups. These groups can be populated internally. If you don't want to use Ranger, there's another way to do that with a file-based system without Ranger. Obviously, most people will probably use Active Directory and use this. But the users and groups that are already in Ranger can be basically used here, and you can assign certain permissions. So basically, in terms of manipulating the business catalog, you can define them all here, right? The idea was really not to recreate the wheel, but to leverage the things that already existed, right? The other piece I want to show you is this really cool section called tag-based policies. So these are the dynamic policies that we talked about. And in the other talk, we'll actually go into great detail. We have 4 aspects of dynamic policies. One of them is tag-based policy. The other one is geography. The other one is a timer-based. And the other one is creating rules against toxic combinations or prohibitions, right? We'll talk about that in the other one. But just to let you know that this is where you would see that, right? This is a PII tag that we'll probably use. Very elegant, policy, right? Just a name, a tag, who's allowed to see it, and then there's an exception. HR admin can see it. I think I see Melissa out there. So Melissa, you're in HR, you can see personally identifiable information, just like that. Users and groups. So anything that's an external group here is basically from somewhere else, and that's where your Active Directory users will end up, right? Pretty easy. Right? So you set up a group, and I have a fancy group called Data Steward and Data Scientist. Pretty straightforward. So it's very easy to set up security, right? All right, so let's go back into Atlas, and I'm going to log in as steward. And this is the new UI that you've been all waiting for. So if you've looked at previous incarnations, we've had tags for a while. And here we can get information about a tag, right? We can create attributes to that tag. And these are customizable. So for instance, if you're dealing with products like a car, you can have an attribute called color. And if you bind that attribute with a truck, you can make it red. Or if you combine that with a subcompact, you can make it blue, right? So it allows you quite a bit of agility there, right? But for us, we have PII, which is good enough just as a flag, right? And you can add different attributes. You'll notice that in our testing, we discovered that people just wanted to know what things are associated with that tag. So if you click on a tag, it'll automatically just search for the assets associated with that tag. So you can see a bunch of columns, and there's a table, test 3. So it's very easy to get that information. And then you can do a larger search, right? So this can paginate, right? In terms of searching, this is really searching for assets. So I can search for things like Hive, I think. Yes, I can. I can search for ETL. But I can also use a more specific language called DSL, which is domain-specific query language. And that you can use a very rich syntax. So I can look for all Hive tables. I can look for all Hive columns. Because I'm connecting and getting information, I can even get all Hive processes. Right? So I know everything that was done on Hive, right? Likewise, this would be true for those other components as well, right, that we integrate with, which we'll talk about in the next section. Anyways, so let's get back over here so we can look at Hive table. Right, and you can see some activity. It looks like somebody deleted something here. This was a test 2 that somebody deleted. We can get information about that. We have a tag called deleted. It's going to calculate lineage. We get all kinds of information. We get audits, what happened to it when it was created. We actually dynamically capture schema, so we even have that information. But as there's a schema. Sorry, I kind of passed by there quickly. But one of the things that you probably want to get more information on is perhaps tagging that data. So here, I tag that data. I can tag employee data with a tag, and this is pulling off the list that we generated previously. There's PII. So now I have a tag. I can add as many tags as I want. And there's a term. This is attached to company ABC HR employee. So now it has a business tag, and here's a lineage, right? So it paints this nice picture for you. You can, resize it as you like. And it's interactive. If you mouse over them, you can get information about it. Looks like somebody did a create view, right? And they did it as a select star. Probably not a great idea, but it looks like it's we're USA. So they filtered out. They created a table for USA employees, right? So you can see the basic lineage, and as I click through them, I can actually walk through the lineage. So it's very interactive, and as I do that, I get this information. I get the properties. Now, this is configurable, but these are the properties that we're getting out of the hook. You can augment that if you like. These are the tags associated with it, the terms that are associated with it. That's the business catalog, and audits, right? Exactly what happened, and we got the schema. Now here, I can actually go and tag specific columns of that schema. So if you've looked at our tutorial, we have tag-based security. When a steward comes in here and tags that PII, that will enforce that tag-based rule. So within a few seconds, it'll actually be enforced. And if we have time, maybe I can show you that. And definitely, we'll have it in the Dev Cafe as well as our other session, right? But really, the thing that you're here for is probably this other tab that we've integrated in there called business. So the taxonomy itself. So here I can search for terms directly. So if I wanted to find things about life insurance, I can probably do that. I can find life insurance. And if you have a very complicated taxonomy with a bunch of business terms, I can zip through it and find it pretty quickly. It's indexed. It's a very fast search. As you see, it only shows one level here. And the reason why we did that, and this is another thing that we learned from doing our usability testing, which is if you have a file browser type of paradigm, once you get to about 4 or 5 levels deep, it's basically unusable, right? And we're anticipating that the business taxonomy or catalog could be hundreds, levels deep, right? Deep and wide. So we want to make sure we had something that could scale. So we keep a breadcrumb trail up here, and if you get beyond this level, it'll actually give you some ellipses, which you can hover and get that information. So this is basically the path of our hierarchy, of our taxonomy or catalog, and this is the localized piece of it, right? So if I look into life insurance products, and I want to find out things like codes, this is basically pulled out of a Cord, right? I just did this in a few minutes before the session. So I just cut and pasted some information about what codes would be. There's a notion of insurance, life insurance products, and there's a thing called keys, also known as sys keys, and they have a very specific meaning. Boy, I didn't want to reproduce that, so I just slapped it in there, right? I could have put a link in here as well, right? So this is the power that you have. You can quickly create a whole new taxonomy, map it to a standard like a Cord, and really simply do this, right? Now what I can do is I can go into search, and let's say I want to find, I think I created a customers table. So let's see what we have here. Customer, right? So there's a bunch of columns, there's a table. Oh, it's somebody we created, one with the same name. That was probably me. I can create a term, and I can associate that with a product, life insurance. I can assign that. So now if I were to go and search for either customer or life insurance, I would be able to get that relationship, right? And this is a very simplistic version of this, but you can use it for all kinds of things. So what I did here is I combined a logical idea of what a life insurance product customer would be with a real table, right? So that's kind of the big area. We can combine that together, and now we can create annotations as well, right? That make sense, anybody? Okay. It actually is kind of not a great demo in many ways because it actually behaves the way you would expect it to behave, but it was actually quite a bit of work. It's very robust, and we can talk about the guts of it, in the other session. But this simple combination is really powerful, right? So now, in doing this, let's say I go into, let's search for employees. All right, I think I created an employee table somewhere. So let's just go into here. And as you see, if I look into the schema, you can see that there's PII associated with them. Now, if I go into any kind of, tool to write SQL, I think I created a user called HR user. And you can use anything for Hive, and this could be another application that sits on top of Hive. If I try to do a select star from, I think it's in there, employee. I get this error because we have tag-based policy and tagging enabled, right? But if I were to just look for something that's not covered by PII like ID, I can show you that I can get this. Okay, I think I made a mistake here. Select ID from HR employee. All right, so I think I have something probably misconfigured here. Thank you for correcting my bad syntax. Okay, magic. Phew. Okay, thanks a lot. So the idea here is that it's active protection, right? I could go and tag more things here, and within a few seconds, it would actually get implemented. So not only can you organize your data logically and physically, right, and conceptually, you can annotate it with different policies, and then now those tags that you did are not just informational. Now that it can provide you active protection, right? Sorry, there was a question. Yes. Sorry, again? Oh, you want to run a query for PII? Yeah. Sure. So if I run a query for PII, it's going to give me all the assets associated with PII. Right? So it'll even give me a column. I think we've done probably a lot of tagging. So these are customer IDs, things that you would normally expect, like SSN. But you can create any tag you like, right? You can also, in our demo, we also have a tag which is called expires on, which I don't think we have time to address here, but we can also create this notion of expiry. So this would stop access to data. And this is different from deleting the data, because this basically is a nice way to gently get people off of an asset. It'll stop new access to it. So if you're borrowing data, if you have customer data kind of in a provisioned environment, this will basically allow you to manage it more effectively. There's SOX 90-day reporting rules that you can also incorporate into this. It's a lot of different ways you can leverage this. That's probably better for another talk. So that was my quick tour of the business catalog. We have some tutorials available, but if I can answer some questions, perhaps we can open it up now. There's Saeed. He's going to get a lot of exercise today, so thank you, sir.
A lot of my thoughts about this product and where this is going revolve back to records management, and actually the desire to do more than just expire. So one of the great challenges of records management is a single platform to manage records across the entire enterprise, but B, the ability to have event triggering. The number one records management regulation in the world that I can think of is when a bank account is closed, from the time it's closed, you have 7 years before you can delete the records.
Sorry, from the
So
time that it's closed, what?
you have 7 years.
Okay,
So the
yes.
clock starts at the clock starts in an event, not from the
Of course,
an event
of
that
course.
happens at an unpredictable.
Yeah, there's a notion of nominal time, and then that's when you create it, and then that can be amended. So in a former life, I probably should have mentioned I worked at the NYC Euronext, so we were in 12 countries, 23 different market centers. So we have a similar rule. Basically, we have golden data that comes out of our matching engine, and that trade has to be kept for 7 years, unless it's subpoenaed by like Department of Justice. Lots of fun, and then the clock resets. Right? So that type of thing, that type of scenario we can handle a couple of ways. So deleting the data, getting rid of it, we can do with Falcon. Okay? But we want to stop access to it. So typically what you want to do is you don't want to just go and delete data because that's going to make people upset, right? That's going to make them mad. They have a long-running job. It ran a little longer than you thought, right? So you expire the data like on a Wednesday, and then you delete the data on a Sunday, however you want to do it, right? Or you can move that data from a hot to a warm, to a cold, to the ice box, right? So that type of move can also be something that might happen before that expiration time, right? So all these management scenarios are very important. Another thing would be, most of you have more than one environment. You have a UAT environment, maybe you have a discovery environment, and you want to move data sets back and forth, right? Well, you got to get people off that data set, and you're not going to step on anybody's toes. So this is just a nice way to do it. And it's all done through metadata, so it's pretty straightforward. It's all done in one place, and we track it all. So while we're going to the next question, let me just throw up the audits. So we have audits for everything, right? So that's one thing. Can we get the other side too when you're done, sir? Yeah.
So I noticed that you stored metadata for deleted objects. Is
Yes.
there a way to set, or how long does this store that, or can you set how long it stores metadata?
By default, we're storing it forever, but you can set a limit for the metadata itself.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a question about terms and tags. So are you able to tag a term? So for instance, if I wanted anything that was termed to be a life insurance product to be SPI or PHI or something like that, could it always automatically add that?
Would you want to tag a logical business term?
Yeah, exactly.
Right now, the answer is no. But it will be yes, in a couple of weeks, because that's something I've been fighting for. The problem has to do with some other pieces. We have the thing called versioning, which I didn't talk about very much, but not only do we have audits, we actually have versioning, which allows us, and I kind of talked about it briefly, which is basically we have a state of the object, which is whether it's active or deleted. We also keep the creation time and the deletion time. So we actually have this notion of nominal time that we can move, right? So that's really important for those types of scenarios. We get to some tricky scenarios where we can, if we tag something and it changed as a part of the timeline, we have these weird logical things that we have to sort through, in a nutshell. But we will have it. That's the short answer.
Okay, and then just one more quick question. So when you did the example query for PII and it would not execute, I assumed if it was the correct query, it still wouldn't have given you the PII, but you could still search for the PII tag. Is that the default setting, or would there be a way to stop anyone from both querying data but also not be able to query that tag?
So let's distinguish between seeing the metadata versus the payload of that data, right? So right now, we have two roles, which is basically analyst and steward. In the next release, we'll have a thing called taxonomical ACL. So we're actually going to provide access rules on every branch of the taxonomy, and we'll also have a thing called tag inheritance. So if you do some action, the derivative data set would inherit the parent tags. So if you had a PII tag, it would get inherited. That's not implemented yet. I'm just being very honest and forthright. That's going to come really soon. We had to knock out some other foundational issues first. That'll also come with column-level lineage, right? So if you take certain columns and move them around, we'll do that. One thing that we did add that we don't really talk about is we do handle inserts. So if you have time series data and you're inserting stuff every day, we'll actually track that now. We actually keep the current state of that, and we also keep the audits of every time that happened, right? The challenge really is to show the UI in a nice way. Yeah. Yep.
Hi, I got a question. So if you have a table tagged as PII and you have another table public, and if you have a derived table, so your data lineage, how does it handle that situation? Would it mark the derived table with bunch of columns from public as well as a PI table as a
If
PI?
if the user, if the person running that query did not have access to PI, that would not even get, once it went, so it's kind of getting into the guts of Ranger, but Ranger has a thing called a policy enforcement point, which is basically a traffic cop. The traffic cop's going to stop that access, it's going to analyze it and throw it back to this thing called a policy decision point, where all of the policies are basically compiled, right? It would not get past that decision point, and basically that query would not even get submitted into Hive. So it's very efficient, actually. So you wouldn't be able to make that join at all.
If you are able to make the join, would the Atlas assume that you have Ranger policy created for that? Would Atlas data lineage would detect that the derived table falls under the PIA category?
That would be tag inheritance, which is not currently supported.
Okay.
But that is something on our roadmap. But but to your point, though, you wouldn't be able to make that query in the first place, right? So part of that has to be, I mean, we're building tools. They're not perfect. They're not going to prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot, right? We assume that, we have responsible actors. So we try to do our best in terms of getting the tooling up there. And we're making progress every day. But initially, that query would not be there. Could you circumvent the system? Absolutely. Yep. Oh, actually, could we, after that gentleman, could you get Simon? He's over there, Syed. He's right over there to your left. Yeah.
Do you guys have APIs so that other applications can write into the Atlas metadata?
Absolutely. And I'm dying to show you this other slide, but I have to save it for my other presentation. But the idea is that we have it. And we have a technical user guide that we've just refreshed that we're going to publish. And I think, Syed, I don't know, do we release our new sandbox yet? Yeah, but we're really close to releasing that, and basically it's like a Happy Meal. So you can use the technical user guide to do simple things like gets and puts, but you can also get things like create a brand new type, right? So our type system is flexible, and this is probably for the other discussion, but essentially you could create a brand new type, right? And that's how we create all of the types that we have now, right? So you could create a brand new thing. So Hive has database, tables, columns, views. Storm has topologies. It's like they're totally different. So we have to have a way of creating these types. So we have a modular, extensible system by doing this. So you can basically create a type for anything that's outside of Hadoop. In fact, there's a customer that wants to use it for something that has nothing to do with Hadoop. They just want it to be an open source metadata service, right? That has basically huge scalability, right? So after Simon, we can maybe get this gentleman. Simon, sir.
Hi, Andrew. Firstly, great job on the UI.
Thank you. I was hoping that you'd approve.
Great to see this. I want to clarify, I think, a comment that was made earlier on metadata tagging, so the ability to actually control what the data scientists would see. So what we saw here is released in 2.5.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And then the metadata tagging that you said is coming next. Is that with 3.0? Is that what's
It's probably going to come as a maintenance release.
Okay.
That's something that's actually not very hard to implement. We just had to get some versioning kind of housekeeping completed first. But the view is actually very similar. So let me log out of steward and log in as an analyst. So right now we only have 2 roles. And the analyst, as you notice, will actually, when you try to do an edit, you'll actually, it's a little slow, but what happens when you try to do an edit operation, it'll actually prevent you from doing so. That's why it's hanging right now. It's not this is a demo environment. It actually won't let you do this. In the GA version, you won't even have this button at all, right? So really, it becomes a read-only version. Now, I think, Simon, to your question, we probably want, what I'm reading into it is that you probably want the taxonomical ACL portion of it, which is basically allowing you to see only portions of the taxonomy and not the whole thing. We can work around that. We have an ability to do multiple routes. We just turn it off by default, but we could turn it on. So we could create a taxonomy for each group that you want, and you can have an overarching steward. That's something that you can implement right now. The correct way to do it is having a nice ACL that we can turn it off and on at anywhere you want in the branch, right? So we have a workaround now, and we'll have the taxonomical ACL probably as a maintenance release in the fall. Yes, sir.
So quick question on resource types. So we've obviously seen tables like with Hive and so on.
Yep.
What about files and other supported types out of the box?
Okay, God, that's my other presentation.
Sorry.
So we support Scoop, Kafka Storm, Falcon, okay? And that's really important. Falcon handles quite a bit of different types. So you can do pig jobs, but you can manipulate files quite easily in Falcon. Now, Storm topologies can land in a Hive table, but they can also land in files. So we don't support HDFS in its entirety now, right? We don't have a simple way of knowing every transient ephemeral file that gets created on every data node. That's a really tough problem. Anybody who says they can do that, you may want to kind of dig into that solution a little bit. Right, but for us, what we want to do is, as a consequence of the other components, we do want to track that, right? So if the payload ends up being a file, and you do something else with that file, we need to track it, and we do track that. We model that as a file type path, right? And we do that because Ranger already models security in that way, right? So it can be recursive, right? So in that way, if you have an intermediate state between, let's say, data coming in from a Storm topology lands as a file, and that file gets manipulated somehow and turns into a table, that intermediate state is tracked, right? And if you're doing custom reports, you can just say, hey, instantiate another type, right, an entity from this type file, and call it this name, give it these attributes. You can create your own attributes. You can copy it and have a slightly modified version of that, right? Maybe you want to track different attributes. By default, we have name, some properties, owner, expiration, things like that. Maybe you want to add a few more. No problem. You can do that, right, based upon your regulatory requirements, right? Yes, sir. Ma'am.
Hi, does this work? Hello.
Hello.
Sorry. I agree with you completely that if you don't have governance, everything else it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So, yay. Okay. But it's got to be hard to track lineage of all these different changes. And the auditing in Lineage has to be very expensive. How can you do that without degrading performance in this system?
That's a great question, and God, that's my other talk. But let me just throw you my slide while I answer.
I'll be at your other talk. But
Okay, so let me just give it to you really quickly, and then we can go into detail. Basically, we do it kind of in a different way. We have basically a notion of a hook and a client-side app to do the bootstrapping. But let's talk about the hook. The hook basically writes to a new piece that we incorporated called a messaging framework. We have message durability. And the idea there really is to do two things. One, we can replay messages if something breaks, but two, if our graph database for some reason gets backed up, we can queue up our messages, and we can dequeue them in a kind of an orderly manner, asynchronously. Other things can go on. And hello, David, I didn't notice that you were here. And you can get on with your processes, right? And we can catch up. It won't be very long, but we can do it pretty quickly, right? So it's pretty efficient to just dump data into this queue, right? And that's kind of this kind of abstraction, this messaging tier we've created. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that all of the components that we get data from, it's not something that we're gluing on top of it. It's actually part of those projects. The Hive hook, the thing that's reporting, it's a part of Hive. The thing from Storm, it's a part of Storm. So this is stuff that's native in the component. That's one of the things that we can do as Hortonworks. We have so many committers there. So I just walked over to those guys, a couple of months ago and said, we got to do this. And, we had some horse trading, and they said, okay, right? No, the gentleman over there says, we're out of time. So I'm going to break my setup here down. If you have any questions, feel free to find me, and I'll also be available in office hours, I think in the main ballroom, as well as having another session at 4:10. We encourage you to come to that one as well. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.